stakeholders in this conflict to try to determine what the next steps are, because there's so much at stake here.
What do we know about the national security meeting that took place today?
Come back here around 6 p.m., which he did, and meet with his national security team, which is not out of the ordinary given the tight deadline that he had set for determining whether he was going to do this or not. He had been having frequent national security team meetings since he rushed back from the G7 summit earlier in the week because he said he wanted to monitor the situation in Iran. And so we are trying to learn more about all the timing. We need a timeline, a tick-tock for exactly when this happened and, where the president was. How did he monitor these attacks? How did he receive information in real time as these teams were carrying them out? And again, what the plan is moving forward.
Do we know what Iranian state media is saying about all of this at this point, or have they said anything at all?
We are still, this is obviously breaking news right now, so we are trying to get information from all of our teams in the region, from London, from Iran, and so far as just a few minutes ago, about 10 minutes ago, we have been monitoring Iranian press, and there has not been a formal response yet. So nothing out of Iran at this hour, but that is a critical question as we wait to see what the response is going to be.
And also response from the rest of the world, Europe, for example.
Well, Europe just had meetings to try to have a diplomatic end to all of this. And the thing is that the U.S. was not directly involved with those. And so the Europeans really were trying to, insert some kind of diplomacy and try to convince the Iranians to really come to the table with President Trump in the U.S. to discuss getting out of the conflict. But the Iranians made very clear that they would not engage in direct talks with the U.S. unless there was a ceasefire, unless Israel stopped bombing, stopped the attacks, and vice versa, obviously, because they said they wouldn't negotiate during an active war. But when I asked the White House about that, they dodged the question. They didn't say that that is something that the president was calling for. And in fact, he himself said that it's not something that he wanted because he thought the situation had already moved beyond that he wanted something bigger than a ceasefire, that he really guarantee to an end of Iran's ambitions to develop a nuclear weapon.
So many questions that need to be answered tonight. In less than an hour, the president will be speaking at 10 p.m., as you mentioned, and we are awaiting what the president will say. But in the meantime, how do you think Democratic lawmakers are going to react to this news?
So we are gathering all of the reaction from these lawmakers on both sides, because this is obviously critical. But, I imagine that many of those voices will be saying they warned that something like this could happen, that there could be an escalation in the region. And so, again, we are just waiting to hear from more voices. And because this is just breaking and developing, some lawmakers are still getting read in on this, are still trying to get the latest intelligence on this. Of course, there were briefings on the Hill ahead of this. We know that the House Speaker was briefed ahead of the U.S. strike, and don't know whether he relayed that information. But this is a very ongoing situation, so we are just waiting to compile all of that reaction for you.
You've been following the White House for quite some time. What do you take of all of this that's happened, this unexpected bombing of Iran at this point with no warning whatsoever, especially given the fact that the president had said he was going to be giving Iran 2 weeks? So this comes as a complete surprise.
Well, It does and it doesn't. Because there was always some concern that even the announcement of that 2-week window to try to reach a deal was just a head fake to, clear the path essentially for this to happen, because you can't just do this overnight. It takes time, it takes calculation, it takes, it takes the Pentagon and all of the teams that carry this out having the space to be able to do that. And so there was always one school of thinking that perhaps this was just an arbitrary deadline. But on the other hand, we had extensive reporting that there were loud voices and advisors surrounding the president who were, having him really think through whether this was the right move because of the potential implications and all the unknowns involved with this. And so with this particular president, it's not necessarily ever a surprise, even though it might be shocking, because it is unprecedented.
Unprecedented and quite the gamble as well. Let's talk about the sites that were hit. What do you know about this from covering the White House and these particular sites that were targeted? Weijia.
These are Iran's nuclear sites, and so obviously these are where they are developing their potential components for the weapons. And Fordow is extremely tricky because it is built into the side of a mountain, and it is very difficult to get to, which is why the U.S. bunker buster bomb that was used, this particular kind of bomb, is really the only option to completely destroy Fordow. And we don't even know if that was the case, whether it completely took it out or just partially. But the 30-pound bomb had to also be transported by U.S. B-2s to drop it down, because you're talking about such massive, weaponry here. And so the hope, and President Trump said as much in his post, is that it was able to disable and decapitate, really, these sites that are so critical to Iran's nuclear program.
And so America has known about these sites for quite some time, and it isn't until Israel and Iran got into their latest conflict that the U.S. Seems as if it decided to do this, right?
These sites have been well known for these. No, to answer your question, these are not new to the United States. The question was always whether the U.S. was going to become directly involved to strike them.
And with the developing situation between Israel and Iran, the U.S. decided to do this offensive move.
Israel has been lobbying for the U.S. to join its efforts. And even publicly, we saw Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu say as much without explicitly saying it. So, yes, that is always what Israel has wanted. But there were, a lot of skeptics who the president was speaking with who said they should just carry this out alone. We should not get entangled in this, for all the reasons that, presidents have to consider when they decide whether to become directly involved with any conflict.
Do we know if there are other sites that have this potential, the nuclear potential? Weijia, sorry.
No. So Iran has several sites. And what started this entire conflict with Israel was Natanz, which was also a very significant site that Israel bombed on Monday. The Fordow is another significant site, and there are several of these. As you saw the president post, he said that the U.S. actually targeted 3 of these sites that hold different components, different stockpiles of chemicals that are used to build nuclear weapons. And so, again, this is nothing new to the U.S. that has been tracking Iran's nuclear program for several decades. There was always concern among other administrations here at the White House that if you were to do something like the U.S. just did today, that there would be consequences. And there was always concern about what those consequences are. Those concerns are still very real tonight.
Diplomacy has worked in the past with Iran, has it not? For the U.S. Not to wait for diplomacy to work, but it has worked in the past, hasn't it, Weijia?
Well, as we just talked about, the Obama administration did broker an Iranian nuclear deal to have the Iranians abide by a certain set of guidelines that several other countries also signed off on. But when President Trump came to the White House, he found that agreement to be inadequate. And so he promptly pulled out of it. And Iran hasn't entered another such deal yet. And it was something that this administration had been trying to do. The president said he gave them 60 days to do that. And then on day 61, that is when the president says that Israel launched the attack on Natanz.
Once again, as people are joining us now, we just want to let them know what has taken place. President Trump announced that strikes have happened on 3 Iran nuclear sites. And that's the breaking news that we are covering right now. We have Weijia Jiang with us live talking about the very latest developments. Weijia, take us back to how this started within these past few months, how this has escalated between the U.S. and Iran, and with Israel, with the conflict with Israel and Iran as well. Let's give folks a little bit of history here who may not have been following this as closely.
This conflict between these two nations extends back decades. And obviously, we can't forget that there is another conflict in the region after Hamas brutally attacked Israel on October 7th of 2023, which led to a conflict in that region. And there was always accusations and concerns that Iran and its proxies were backing Hamas and other terrorist groups that were trying to attack Israel even further. And so, that set the stage for a potential opening for Netanyahu, because there has been conflict with Iran for so long, and there have been other attacks in recent times. And so, the concern is that Israel recently came out and said that they had intelligence that Iran was extremely close to developing a nuclear weapon. And that's why they felt like it was an existential threat to Israel, that they could not wait any longer and they had to attack, which is what prompted that last week. And obviously, the U.S. has been in lockstep with Israel in many conflicts. But interestingly, when this unfolded, the White House's first statement was that this was done unilaterally by Israel, and the United States was not involved. That quickly changed, and after Israel's strikes were successful, the president, made public remarks to make it seem like the U.S. may have at least been a partner, because they do supply so much aid and weaponry to Israel every year. And so that quickly escalated with this administration and President Trump repeatedly talking about how close Iran is to obtaining a nuclear weapon, which is why they, said they were going to put an ultimatum on Iran to come to the table and agree on their own to dismantle their program, or that the president was weighing a strike.
Weijia Jiang, thank you so much for your live report, bringing us the latest from the White House on what's going on this evening. And just to sum things up, we are following breaking news out of the Middle East, where President Trump has announced U.S. strikes on 3 Iran nuclear facilities, and he is expected to address the nation at 10 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to bring you to the BBC now, who's continuing to follow this breaking news.
Has essentially neutered the long-range strike capabilities, the political infrastructure, and the military capabilities of 2 of them that flank Israel, Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. That leaves the Houthis, which the U.S. battled for nearly 2 months in Yemen, and the Iran-backed Shia militias in Iraq, which traditionally have attacked U.S. bases, as well as those on the border with Syria. These two do not have necessarily the political wherewithal to enter at the same level that the state of the Islamic Republic of Iran has. But if you're looking abroad, those are whom the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which sits at the head of this axis of resistance, may be looking to.
I'm just going to read you this. We're getting a bit more details about some of the diplomacy leading up to those US strikes. Our partners, CBS News here in America, are saying that the US reached out to Iran diplomatically on Saturday to say that the strikes are all it plans to do and that, I quote, regime change efforts are not planned. Behnam, your reaction to that?
Well, one, it's quite clear that President Trump, or at least what President Trump has been saying and signaling in public, is greatly believed to be and now known to be the same thing that which he's signaling and saying in private, meaning the president has not been interested in regime change operations this entire time. Yes, he was critical of the Obama-era nuclear deal, but indeed he wanted a drastically different one, a better one. He wanted his own. He was unable to get that with the Iranians in his first term. He was unable to get that within the 60-day window he gave the Iranians in his second term. Now, how much of this message that he has communicated to the Iranians in private, how much of that is filtered through the lens of the Islamic Republic's revolutionary ideology, the lack of willingness to trust a message from America, particularly from President Trump, who they have particular enmity with from term one, how much of that will be filtered remains to be seen, and particularly if Iran's aging supreme leader, now believed to be in a bunker somewhere, tweeting 4 hours ago about the defense of Palestine, for example, how much of his desire and his enmity and his personal hatred now sees this as not a counterproliferation operation, but as a regime change operation. And if the Islamic Republic ignores it, how might it go about responding?
One more question for you, if I may, as someone who watches Iran very closely. What do you think the Iranian people are likely to be thinking about this and those calls from some quarters for regime change? Because we know amongst many people, they are unpopular.
Yes, the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran is drastically unpopular on the Iranian street. You've seen boom and bust cycle of anti-regime protests really from 2017 go away from reform and really seek wholesale change of the system. Now, the Iranian people have been unable to achieve that wholesale change of the system because they are outgunned by a much stronger national security state. But over the past week and a half, they've seen really the Islamic Republic's adversaries, Israel and America, who long from their own bully pulpit have been supporting the Iranian people, really neuter the long-range strike capabilities, the missile military infrastructure that the regime has built. So this deals a real status blow to the regime. And I do worry, actually, about the population, not just because I'm an Iranian American, but I do worry about the population because as the regime loses these capabilities due to defeats from abroad, it may turn around and crack down and intensify that political pressure, that abuse of citizens, those human rights violations at home. This is really the only way that the regime will, again, try to re-bolster its deterrence. And I fear right now that Iran 2025 could look like, if Donald Trump does not finish the job, if Israel also shies away from a larger counter-regime operation, that Iran in 2025 could look like Iraq after 1991, where Iraq did not have the capability to fight Israel or America, but what happened there was a totalitarian terror was locked in for a decade that ultimately pulled in the U.S. a decade later in a larger land war.
OK, Ben Talebler, thank you very much for all your contributions this evening. I do understand that you have to leave us now, but thank you very much for sharing your insights. Just a reminder, if you're just joining this rolling coverage here on BBC News, that President Trump has confirmed that the US has struck 3 nuclear sites in Iran, the Fordo site, the Natanz and the Esfahan site. Mr. Trump posting on social media that a full payload of bombs was dropped on the site of Fordo. He said there is not another military in the world that could have done this. Now, we understand that this was done in coordination with Israel, who were aware of this happening. Iranian state media has confirmed those strikes, saying that part of the Fordo site was, I quote, attacked by enemies. And in just over 30 minutes, the president is going to make a televised address to the nation from the White House. Well, joining me now is Colonel Brendan Kearney, the former Chief of Staff for the US Marine Corps Forces. Thank you very much for waiting patiently. It's good to talk to you here on BBC News. What do you make of what we've heard so far about this military operation?
Well, it's not a surprise. I mean, we've been anticipating this for the last couple days. There's certainly been open source reporting in terms of aircraft movement, aircraft carrier movement into the region, and President Trump has been very frank with what he intended to do. He was trying to give peace a chance, but seemingly some indicators have shown him that the chance is up. So I'm not surprised at all that this operation is ongoing.
Have you ever come into any sort of contact with the B-2s yourself? Can you tell us more about, if it's confirmed that they were used, just how they operate?
Well, you know, most of the time they fly very, very long distances, and that's because they're an aircraft that needs very sophisticated maintenance. So you're looking at Diego Garcia, you're looking at an airfield in Montana, Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. I have seen them operate. However, I was retiring just as they were coming into full operational capability, but I certainly know what aircraft like them and B-52s can do, as I witnessed that myself in the first Gulf War.
And also reports on Fox News that Tomahawks were used when it came to striking Natanz and Isfahan. So again, just your thoughts on that.
Well, that's not unusual. The United States has a very, very sophisticated capability when it comes to cruise missiles, and we use them very successfully over the last number of years. They're a superb capability. There's not many countries that have anything even closely capable of doing what a Tomahawk can do. They're sea launched, so they're very mobile. And I think it's all part and parcel to what is probably going to be a couple days, if not a couple weeks, of an aerial campaign that'll be launched against the Islamic Republic.
You think this is just the start then, Colonel?
I do. I think we'll get a little bit more out of the president here in about a half an hour.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise on this developing story. That's Colonel Brendan Kearney, former Chief of Staff for the US Marine Corps. Well, it's 9:30 almost here in
We're continuing to follow breaking news out of the Middle East. Right now, President Trump announced the U.S. has attacked 3 nuclear sites in Iran. In a post on Truth Social, he called the attack successful and says the planes are now outside of Iranian airspace. Trump went on to write, quote, "Now is the time for peace." Mr. Trump says he will address the nation from the White House at 10 p.m. Eastern time, which is just about 30 minutes from now. Sources tell CBS News the U.S. reached out to Iran today and said these strikes are the only ones that the U.S. has planned. For more on this breaking news story, let's bring in CBS News national security contributor Samantha Vinograd on the phone with us. Samantha.
Good evening.
Tell us what the significance is of an attack like this by the U.S. in the Middle East.
Well, at this juncture, the primary concern for the president and his national security team are the safety and security of Americans in the region, around the world, and that includes here in the homeland. When I was at the Department of Homeland Security, we were deeply aware of Iran's capabilities to inspire and direct attacks against U.S. assets. That's through their vast network of proxies, including individuals here in the United States. So right now, law enforcement and intelligence professionals are on heightened alert for any indication of reprisal attacks against Americans here in the homeland or U.S. assets overseas. Of course, that includes military installations in the Middle East, as well as American tourists and those living abroad as well. The significance of the attacks is, in the first instance, going to come down to whether the attacks were successful, whether these attacks actually destroyed the ability for Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan to function. If bunker buster bombs were used, I think it is quite likely the attacks were successful. So right now, again, the president and his national security team should be reviewing any threats to Americans as a result of these strikes and trying to ascertain whether they were successful.
On Truth Social, the president did indicate that the strikes were successful. That's what he said. We'll hear more from him once again in less than 30 minutes. But what kind of response, we can go into this a little bit deeper, are we expecting from Iran, and how quickly could we see this actually take place?
Well, the United States has already taken precautionary measures to try to mitigate any kind of reprisal. That includes dispersing U.S. military assets in the region so that they're not all concentrated at particular bases. It also includes moving additional offensive assets to the region in the event that Iran tries to act, and to try to deter Iran from taking more aggressive action. We've moved an additional carrier strike group and fighter squadron, among other assets. U.S. bases are certainly at risk, as well as the hundreds of thousands of Americans living in the region. So we could expect Iran to unleash missiles at U.S. bases in the Middle East. Iran has a significant network of proxies all around the world that it could activate against Americans. And Iran also has very advanced cyber capabilities that it could leverage if it so chooses.
Sam, we know that plans have been set in place to protect or replace Iranian. I'm looking right now. We do have the map up of the three areas that were hit. Let's go into that first. Let's talk about the areas that where the U.S. struck in terms of the three sites that they believe have nuclear capabilities.
Sure. So they are Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. The first two are uranium enrichment centers. Fordow, the site there, is very deep inside of a mountain. Natanz was struck earlier this month by Israel. And again, these are two uranium enrichment centers. The third site, Isfahan, is where we believe the Iranians are keeping most of its highly enriched uranium. So if these attacks are successful, the United States would have destroyed Iran's ability to both enrich uranium and have destroyed a significant amount of its almost bomb-grade material.
And how badly have they been hit, do we know for sure? Is there any indication in terms of how close they are to populated areas and what's happened in that region as a whole?
Well, we don't yet know how successful these attacks were, but again, if the bunker buster bomb known as the massive ordnance penetrator was used, I do think that there is a strong chance that they were successful. These sites are located not directly within a major city. Isfahan actually is a very populated center, actually, so we don't yet know if there were civilian casualties. Certainly individuals working at these facilities would have been impacted by these massive bombs, but we have to wait for the battleground assessment.
What do we know about plans to protect or replace Iranian leaders? What do we know about those talks?
Well, we understand that the Israelis may have had the capability to assassinate the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, who ultimately is a key decision maker on whether to break out to a nuclear weapon, and who will ultimately give a signal as to whether, for example, Iranian proxies should be activated. President Trump reportedly told Prime Minister Netanyahu not to assassinate Khamenei. Later, President Trump himself said that the United States had the capability to assassinate Khamenei. We don't know if that's true, but he did make that statement. So there are concerns that the United States and Israel are focused on regime change, although President Trump has indicated that he's focused on the nuclear program and not on regime change itself, but time will tell.
Israel obviously has been key in all of this. Has Israel issued any type of official response to these U.S. strikes?
Israel will, and Prime Minister Netanyahu will likely be very pleased that President Trump decided to take this action. Dating back to my time in the Obama administration, Prime Minister Netanyahu has asked U.S. presidents to take exactly this type of action. So certainly Israel will issue perhaps celebratory, if not highly positive statements about this military action by the United States.
Sam, what can you tell us about the payload actually used in this attack, in these strikes?
This particular bomb that we keep talking about, the massive ordnance penetrator from MOP, is a 30,000-pound bomb. and is like anything else in the world. Various countries have asked us for it throughout the history of this bomb, but we've kept it for ourselves, and it was really the one munition that had the capability to strike deep within the mountain facility at Fordo.
This decision came after Israel was attacking Iran, right? And it was, what was Israel's aim during its attacks on Iran?
Israel was focused on the same thing since President Trump, which is degrading Iran's ability to obtain a nuclear weapon. There were very deep concerns that Iran was closer to a nuclear weapon than ever before, based upon stockpile of highly enriched uranium. Israel did expand its strikes beyond just nuclear facilities, however, and killing nuclear scientists. Israel attacked military installations as well as some energy infrastructure. So Israel, at least, was more focused on putting pressure on Iran more broadly than the United States. President Trump kept his military strikes to nuclear facilities.
On Truth Social, the president said that this is I'm quoting here, this is a historic moment for the United States of America, Israel, and the world. Iran must now agree to end this war. What do you take of that comment from the president?
I take it that President Trump and Israel are focused on using military pressure to push Iran to the negotiating table to give up any remaining aspect of its nuclear program. So the strategy here is maximum pressure, military pressure, to try to get Iran to the negotiating table to give up any remnant of its nuclear program.
Samantha Vinograd, thank you so much. CBS News national security contributor for us to give us some more insight. Right now, we have retired General H.R. McMaster on the phone joining us as we speak. General, good evening.
Hey, good evening, Krista. Good to be with you.
Thank you for joining us. I'm going to ask you first, what is your take on what has transpired, this shocking breaking news that has transpired this evening?
Well, it's not that shocking, I don't think, because of Iran's intransigence. President Trump decided to give them one more chance, and of course, you had the Iranian foreign minister meet with European foreign ministers yesterday, and the response was kind of bellicose and just said, "Hey, we're not even going to talk until the attacks from Israel stop." So I think that's really may have been the last straw for President Trump.
You know about strikes like this. Tell us what transpired in getting this attack completed and how America got this done.
Well, it's extraordinarily complex, and I'll tell you, I just have so much respect and gratitude for servicemen and women who pulled this off. And so it's orchestrated by the United States Central Command. But as you know, there are elements of strategic command because it involves the B-1 and B-2 bombers that were employing the larger munitions. But it is not just an air operation, it's also a maritime operation and a land operation, because on land you have to operate a lot of the air defense weapon systems. You're also orchestrating a lot of the collection on Iranian capabilities. But the maritime dimension is very significant as well. I think what we'll see is that many of our submarines were involved in firing cruise missiles at these multiple targets, because to hit Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz simultaneously, I think there would have been aerial strike packages as well as maritime strikes.
And something like this, the concern can be for civilians in the region, in the area, because we've seen so many civilian casualties, we should say, in the Middle East over these past several months. What can you tell us about that area in which these strikes have unfolded?
Well, in Fordo, it's pretty remote, so I think the chances of civilian casualties are very low, and it's also very low chances of any kind of radiological leakage, which you have to be concerned about. But in Isfahan and Natanz, those are closer to population centers. But what our military does is goes through a very sophisticated process of determining, the chances of collateral damage or damage or harm or death of innocents. And the munitions that you use are tailored to not only accomplishing the objective of the strike, but also minimizing civilian casualties.
Retired General H.R. McMaster, thank you so much for giving us that insight. We do appreciate it so much. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, great to be with you.
Right now, we have CBS News reporter Haley Ott joining us from Tel Aviv, Israel at this moment. The first thing I want to ask you is, what international reaction have we heard from the U.S. strikes on Iran tonight?
Hello. Well, it is the middle of the night here, but we have already had some reaction. We've heard from Israel's Home Front Command, which is the group that tells people how to respond when there are missile strikes, for example, which is what we've been going through over the past few days. The restrictions have been being released slowly. People have been allowed to go back to work. There was a sense that perhaps this situation was kind of loosening up. And then the other day, they do regular check-ins. The other day, the regulations didn't change, and people thought, that is not the doesn't seem to have been the direction we were going. And then we just got some new regulations now, which is advising everyone here in the country to stay close to a shelter, to not go into the office. Schools remain closed. We've heard that the Israeli Prime Minister will be speaking after the president speaks. We've heard that he has spoken to Mr. Trump before this attack and potentially after. But people are asleep, so they will be waking up in this region to a whole new Middle East.
Do we have any information yet about possible casualties? Perhaps people who were working in that area, because I understand that the areas that were hit were pretty remote. We are scrambling to get as much information as we possibly can. As you say, those areas are remote, and also Iran has had a real information lockdown over the course of this conflict. It's been difficult for us to even speak to our reporters there. We do know from a deputy security official from Isfahan that he's confirmed to us that these attacks on these 3 sites did take place, but we don't know the severity of them. We don't know the impact of them. So that will be some information gathering that happens probably over the next 24 hours. Haley, we appreciate you. Thanks so much for being with us. We want to take you back right now to the BBC for more coverage on this breaking news story.
Response. So we have to wait till morning. If there's a damage assessment has to be done. The other officials that came out in the last hour have been giving 2 information. One is that the sites have been attacked, but they don't go into much detail other than saying some damage has been done to Fordo, but not entirely destroyed is the sense that they're trying to give it. The other thing they're saying is that all nuclear material has been moved out of these sites already. So if Donald Trump or the U.S. administration was thinking that this is lulling Iranians into complicity, it seems that they were expecting this, despite the 2 weeks talk of 2 weeks diplomacy. They seem to have thought that any minute an attack could happen in Fordo, and so therefore they're claiming they have taken all nuclear material out of there, and they've then added that for that reason there is no worries about radioactivity from these sites that could jeopardize health of people who live in nearby cities.
Mm-hmm. And
so
Buckman, I just want to jump in on that, because what we're hearing from our partners at CBS News is they are saying that America reached out to Iran diplomatically on Saturday to say the strikes were all it plans to do and that regime change efforts are not planned. So a sense there that the US, of course, we'll hear from President Trump in about 15 minutes' time, says that this is one and done.
Sure, and will that be enough for the Iranian regime the government in Iran to decide not to retaliate? That's unclear. It's still a very humiliating moment for them, but it is very important that after a week of Israeli attacks, the public in Iran wants this to end. Hundreds of civilians have been killed by Israel. Israel has killed families. Entire families have been wiped out in residential buildings in the middle of the streets. So these are seen as horrific situation that is this only a 7-day war has caused. There, at least much of the public would be hoping that the government won't respond, so this ends. And there's a line drawn underneath it. So they would have to take that into effect as well, into the consideration as well. But they would also have to think about their supporters. They have talked about this nuclear facilities for years. They have spent tens and tens of billions of dollars protecting it, losing hundreds of billions of dollars in sanctions for it. So highest price have been paid. And if they're all destroyed, what do you have to show for it? And that could put pressure on them to respond somehow. But let's remember, the first term of Donald Trump, he attacked and killed a senior Iranian general. The response that came from Iran was missiles shot to a US base in Iraq. And that was the end. So could there be an understanding that Iran uses some missiles to show some reaction, but that doesn't go far enough for US to have to react again? That could also be a possibility. It has been tried. It worked last time. Is the message that they've sent that we don't want regime change? I don't think the regime was particularly worried that America is going to come and change their rule in Tehran, but they most certainly do want to show that they are still have some sort of a deterrence or want one, or that they're not going to sit there like a duck and be hit by Israel and US. At the end of the day, two nuclear power countries have attacked a non-nuclear power country in a week. So we'll see how they respond.
Okay, Bahman, do stay with us. Let's go straight back to Israel and rejoin my colleague Mark Lowen. Mark, I understand that we've had the first reaction now from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What's he been saying?
I'm actually literally just watching it while we speak, Rajini, because it has just come through to us. But I will give you a little flavour of the, I was halfway through it, but I'll give you the flavour of what he said at the start. He said, "Congratulations, President Trump. This is an awesome and righteous move that will change history." There was also a couple of lines that came through in a written statement. Let me just find that now. He said, "President Trump and I often say peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes peace. And tonight, President Trump and the US acted with a lot of strength." We understand that President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have already spoken by phone. A senior Israeli official said that the White House gave the Israeli a heads up before the bombing began. There was a small group of Israeli ministers who were huddling from 10 p.m. local time. That's 5 hours before the strikes, before the confirmation of the strikes, and they were sort of watching it all happen overnight. But clearly, there will be delight from the Israeli government, but that something that they have long called for, long craved, long dreamed of in the eyes of Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been talking about this since 1995. He has been taking every public occasion he could to warn of Iran's imminent nuclear threat. That he has finally got a response and the ear of an American president who has not only kind of allowed or sort of acquiesced in a sense for Israel to go into Iran, but has now sent American bombers themselves into Iran, despite all the queasiness that there is in Donald Trump's political movement, despite all the questions that there are in the Republican base, despite all the worrying echoes that people have constantly pointed out from 2003 when America went into Iraq and toppled Saddam Hussein. When they joined the mission to topple Colonel Gaddafi in Libya, both countries losing their long-time despots and leading to political chaos. President Trump has gone in with a strike on the nuclear facilities that, according to our American partner CBS News, the White House has passed messages to Iran saying that this is not a strike seeking regime change, it is a strike against the nuclear facilities. But what comes next? How does Tehran respond militarily towards Israel? How does Tehran respond against the American military assets in the region? The US has 40,000 troops stationed in this region. This is a perilous moment for them, and it is a perilous moment in terms of what comes next in Iran. How does the Ayatollah respond? His back's to the wall. You know, is there going to be some kind of uprising in Iran? We haven't seen evidence of that yet, But clearly, Iran still has a military capability. It has been firing drones, missiles and the like, and rockets towards Israel in the last few days. And on top of that, Rajini, yesterday we had a threat from a part of its defensive shield, the Houthis in Yemen, who said that they would start resuming attacks on American shipping in the Red Sea if America started bombing Iran. So, a reminder that yes, Iran has been severely weakened. Its defensive shield in this region has been weakened, but it still has bite.
OK, Mark, do stay with us. I'm going to bring Bahman Kalbasi from the BBC's Persian service, who's been monitoring what we're getting from Iran, into the conversation there. Mark, talking about the position in Israel and saying it kind of depends now on what the Ayatollah and the Iranian government does next. What is some of the conversation that you are seeing in Iran about what might come next?
Really, the only source right now is the state television, and there's one host that's sitting there and talking about the response and what has happened. At some point, he says maybe Donald Trump is bluffing, maybe the damage wasn't so big. And then he also says, but if it's a war that Donald Trump started, it's a war that we will end. We had told the Americans through the Swiss government that is the protector of American interest in Iran, that if you attack, we will respond. All of that is sort of stream of consciousness coming from him. It is far away from what the official response is going to be. We are just awaiting the Iranian Atomic Energy Agency to come up with a statement that could happen any second. I was just looking at my phone, seeing if it's come out yet, or not yet. And so
just come in,
that could give us a
Bahman.
better sense of whether they've
That statement has just come in.
I was waiting to see if it had come.
I can just tell you
Okay,
some
there we
of what
go.
it
I can
says.
see
You've
it
got
too,
it?
yes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, I got it. Yeah. And in it, they basically saying that this attack has happened and it is a violation of NPT and international law. And Americans have said via Donald Trump's post that this has happened. And then we expect the world community to condemn this, as this is a violation of international law. That's basically where they leave it, and they say their institution is still committed to defending the Iranian rights to have a peaceful nuclear agency or nuclear cycle. So they're not in a position to say what is going to happen next. Their higher ups, being the supreme leader who is somewhere in a bunker hidden, and the president and the rest of the team, and the new leadership of the military and IRGC, who were just appointed in the last few days post the assassination of the previous ones. They're the ones who have to come and think about the cost benefit of a response to US forces and the dangers that might invite. Or can they have a coordinated face-saving response like the one that they had in the last 2020 when Donald Trump assassinated an Iranian general? A series of missiles was hit, was thrown and targeted a U.S. military base in Iraq. No American service member was hurt, and that was the end of it. Can such a thing be managed, or will it get out of hand? That's the question that we can get a sense of, depending on how they manage expectation when they wake up in the morning.
OK, Bahman Kalbasi, for the moment, thank you very much, but do, of course, stay with us. We are getting more reaction now to the news that America has attacked Iran. A statement coming into us from the United Nations, the UN Secretary General. Let me just read it to you. It says, "I'm gravely alarmed by the use of force by the United States against Iran today. This is a dangerous escalation in a region already on the edge and a direct threat to international peace and security." Mr. Guterres goes on to say there is a growing risk that this conflict could rapidly get out of control with catastrophic consequences for civilians, the region and the world. He says, "I call on member states to de-escalate and to uphold their obligations under the UN Charter and other rules of international law." I'll continue on. Mr. Guterres says, "At this perilous hour, it is critical to avoid a spiral of chaos There is no military solution. The only path forward is diplomacy. The only hope is peace. Let's return to broadcaster Barbara Starr, who has covered the Pentagon for a number of years. Barbara, you've been in this sort of situation before, where we've heard the UN call for diplomacy in other conflicts that the US has been involved in. We've heard the UN say that there is no military solution, but is there any room for diplomacy now?
Certainly hopes that there is, that something will bring Iran to the negotiating table. I think the challenge for President Trump tonight, as we await his remarks from the White House, is bated breath, really. What will Iran do next? Will it launch some kind of asymmetric, if you will, not straight on, but some kind of covert attack against U.S. interests in the region? Will that force the president to then send in additional force or take additional military action? We don't know. Will he have to take additional military action to destroy Iran's nuclear program? We don't even know how far the program has really been set back. He's calling it a successful mission, and it certainly is, because all the pilots are out safely. But that fine-tuned intelligence assessment has to be done. How much damage? How do you calculate how far the Iranians have been set back and gather all the intelligence around the clock about any suggestion of Iranian movement in the region that could be a sign of an attack, or even here in the United States by potential sleeper cells, if you will? These are all, huge questions tonight to which there's no answers. And as you and I were chatting earlier, here in the United States, the American people clearly are not really supportive of another land war, another major war in the Middle East after the years of Iraq and Afghanistan. The challenge for President Trump is, I think most of the world believes he's right. Iran could not be allowed to, gain a nuclear weapon. They had to do something about it. But did they give diplomacy enough of a chance? We'll have to see, and we'll have to see where it goes from here.
Okay, Barbara Starr, thank you very much for your thoughts on the story. And we are expecting in the next minute or so to hear from President Donald Trump to share more information in an address from the White House about the news that the US has attacked Iran. US President Donald Trump saying the US bombed Fordo and other nuclear sites in Iran. This is BBC.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Margaret Brennan in Washington. We have breaking news out of the Middle East. President Trump is about to address the nation. Roughly 2 hours ago, he announced via social media that the United States has bombed 3 nuclear sites in Iran. CBS is reporting 6 B-2 stealth fighters dropped 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs on at least one of those sites, the very first time that weapon has been used in combat. Today, it was to destroy an underground nuclear facility about 60 miles southeast of Tehran. The president said that all American planes are safely now out of Iranian airspace. These American strikes are in support of a war that Israel launched on Iran 9 days ago. We know tonight that the Israeli prime minister has spoken to the president, thanked him, and congratulated him on the strikes. We are awaiting word now from the President of the United States himself, who is expected to address the nation from the White House. As we await him taking the podium, I want to go to our White House correspondent, Weijia Jiang. Weijia, we know that the president returned to the White House in the 5 o'clock hour, around 6 p.m. He had a national security briefing. What do we know about what was going on at that period of time?
Margaret, that's right. He was in his golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey, but came back this evening, which was actually always the plan, even when he took off for that trip. And right beforehand, he said that Iran had at maximum 2 weeks to try to reach a diplomatic deal. There was no indication at that time that he was going to follow through with the strikes, but of course that quickly changed.
We see the president now.
The U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin-Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel. And God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's so. I also want to.
President of the United States walking away from the podium there where he had been flanked by the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio, along with Secretary of Defense and his Vice President, announcing and congratulating the military on what he called spectacular military success in these strikes that were carried out inside Iran earlier today. He said the sites were, quote, completely obliterated. Now, he did seem in those remarks not to completely close the door on further military action. He thanked the U.S. military and said that he hopes that their services won't be needed again. And he said all of this was meant to erase the nuclear threat posed by Iran. To be clear, U.S. intelligence assessment has been that Iran was not yet building a nuclear weapon, but that they had been enriching nuclear fuel at worrisome levels. The international community had high degree of outcry on that point. Just a few weeks ago in Vienna, you had the Israeli strikes come the following day after that, in the midst of what had been a diplomatic effort by President Trump and his envoy, Steve Witkoff, to negotiate with Iran to get them to limit their nuclear program. Those did not result in an agreement, though up until today, I am told, the U.S. was trying to reach out. Yet, just a few hours ago, we saw these strikes carried out. I want to go over to the Pentagon now, where our Charlie D'Agata is. And apparently, Charlie, you'll be there early tomorrow, since the president just said there'll be an 8 a.m. Pentagon press conference where he will detail these strikes. The Secretary of Defense will. What do we know at this hour? I know Iran is acknowledging and saying that these strikes happened, but that it will not end their nuclear program.
Yeah, well, Margaret, we await that briefing tomorrow. We have had very few briefings here at the Pentagon, so it'll be interesting to see how much detail is shared there. But as it was already shared, 6 bunker busters on Fordow, that would have meant at least 3 of the B-2 bombers that we've already discussed, where they came from, when they were deployed. We were talking earlier today about whether they went from Whiteman, whether they were going to Guam. Maybe it was a head pump, maybe it was a head shake of where this was going to go and when it was going to happen. Something like 30 Tomahawk missiles at 2 other sites there. They've been called massive precision strikes. I think what we need to know, and I'm not sure whether that is knowable at this point, is how damaging that was. If the White House is to be believed, whether it crippled and entirely took out Iran's nuclear capabilities at Fordow, Natanz, and Safran. He's calling it a spectacular success. But the other thing we need to be concerned about now is he mentioned when he took out Qassam, or the assassination of Qassam Soleimani when he was president. And we saw the retaliation then across multiple American targets. There are 40,000 U.S. service members spread throughout the Middle East, and they have come under attack before. And we've already known, even leading up to this, because it was always a what if, but leading up to where we are now, we've been speaking to people here at the Pentagon, DOD, saying if there is an Iranian retaliation, how are we postured? How is the United States postured to defend against that? There are multiple. In fact, I can't remember how many times or how the last time we've seen this many military assets flooded into that area in order to defend against a possible Iranian retaliation to protect U.S. forces there.
No doubt that force posture has been really built up in these past few days. At the same time, it was just this morning that we heard the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, announce with detail for the very first time how Americans in Israel could actually safely get out. The U.S. government brought about 70 of them by plane to Greece, evacuating them from the area. The airspace over Israel has been closed for days, so it has made it hard for people to leave if they wanted to, because there has been this back and forth with Iran's retaliation against Israel, some of those missiles piercing their defenses, those U.S.-provided defenses in many ways. And I know it has been remarkable, Charlie, that whether we're talking to current or former officials, they all seem to say it's amazing we haven't yet seen retaliation. We haven't yet seen a strike against a U.S. base or U.S. assets. Now that the United States has entered this conflict in this way, that may change. And I have no doubt that there is a bracing for what could be coming next. I spoke to some diplomats in the region just within the past hour, and I was told there wasn't much of a heads up given to some of our allies there. Just to remind people, Charlie spoke about 40,000 U.S. military personnel in that region of the world. The 4th largest military installation America has in the world is in Kuwait, very close there to Iran. Very significant naval assets in Bahrain. A lot of American families stationed there. So it's not just Israel, it is the surrounding Arab countries that the U.S. is allied with who are holding their breath tonight, wondering if hosting those American forces also makes them a target. So we are going to be watching all those bases that you see there on the screen, as well as some of the other American assets in the region. I also just want to acknowledge here that while the president has been saying this was a successful strike, we don't yet know what the end game is here. We don't know that from the United States, and we don't know that from the nation of Israel either. The goal was stated to be destruction of Iran's nuclear program. Tonight, you have out of Iran statements from their atomic agency saying that this national industry, as they refer to it, will not be stopped. That you can't kill knowledge. There have been, of course, assassinations of nuclear scientists, as we know. We want to go now on the phone. We are joined by General Frank McKenzie, who was the combatant commander there in the Middle East for so many years. General McKenzie, I hope you can hear me now. I know you have literally gamed out this scenario for years when you were in the job. What are those U.S. military families? What are those soldiers and naval men? What are they bracing for tonight? What should we expect with the light of day?
To be with you tonight. I've worked on this plan for 15 years. It looks like a successful strike. As you noted, we'll know more in the hours and days ahead how successful it actually was. But what the Central Command commander right now is most concerned about is the possible Iranian response. What's it going to be? What are they going to do? And a lot of the thinking over the last few days, I'm sure, in the Department of Defense has been how to prepare for that inevitable Iranian response. And so we flowed forces in. We'll be ready for it. What we want to do is avoid a significant loss of American life that would then push us up the escalatory ladder. So we want to save the Iranians from themselves. We want to maintain balance in the region if we can. And that's what the CENTCOM commander is going to be working on right now. I would also note that Iran is gravely weakened as a result of their exchanges with Israel over the past few weeks, and in fact over the last year or so. So this is a very significant thing to bear in mind as we look at what the Iranians might do in response. The final thing I will say is this. The Iranians have held all the lower cards on the escalation ladder. But the simple fact is this. We hold all the higher cards on the escalation ladder, as does Israel, and the Iranians know that.
Well, General, to that point, I was speaking to an Iran analyst just a day ago who described this regime as homicidal but not suicidal, meaning they would restrain themselves from a head-to-head conflict with the United States. As you just pointed out, they are in such a weakened position because of the conflict over the past year or more. Does that had to have factored in to the calculation tonight? Do you think President Trump is being overconfident if he thinks this is one and done?
I think President Trump actually has unique and powerful credibility on this issue. He noted the strike on Qasem Soleimani, which I really believe was the correct action at the time. I was responsible for carrying out his orders on that strike and really began the arc of the trajectory that has taken us to this point. Where Iran is on their back foot and in a very grave danger of even surviving as a state. So I think that's something to understand as we take a look at it. I think we should remember that the primary goal of Iranian statecraft is preservation of the regime. At different times before, this regime has chosen to step back when faced with the possibility of regime destruction. I think they're rapidly approaching that point right now, and I think this measurably moves us forward to that end.
We have learned here at CBS that there was some advance notice that was on passed to Iran about these strikes. But as I said, there wasn't full diplomatic notice being given to all of the allies in the region. You ran that operation in 2020 when, as you mentioned, Qasem Soleimani was taken off the battlefield. How much visibility does the United States have for what comes next? How good is our intelligence in terms of the threat picture?
So, Margaret, our intelligence is very good. Penetration of Iran by human sources and other sources is very good. We're going to have a good feel for what the Iranians are thinking. The other factor that's out there is much Iranian leadership is dead now. And the Iranians have, because of their corrupt system of promoting officers and keeping them in place, they don't have a good succession plan inside their military. So people go into a job and they stay 10, 12, 15 years while they're growing rich from that job. So those people are now dead, but they haven't groomed a successor. So that makes it very hard for the supreme leader to formulate decisions and to transmit those decisions to the Iranian military. And that will further complicate Iranian responses, I believe, in the days and weeks ahead.
Thank you, General. And just to clarify for our audience, as we were talking about the killings of top Iranian officials, many of them have been military leaders. We were showing you a picture there of the supreme leader, we were talking about Qasem Soleimani. We were talking about the supreme leader just now, showing you a picture of him. We do not know his whereabouts at this hour. He has actually not been seen in public for a few days now. He had this video address that we are showing you. But he is at 86 years old, dealing with cancer, and all of our reporting is that he has been very hard to contact. In other words, the top levels of Iranian government aren't sure where their boss is. At this hour, we do not know his whereabouts. When we're talking about succession planning, that is the man, that is the main decision maker from which all things flow. And so this question of what comes next is going to be really important to think about as we look at who else may be able to give orders or not give orders. We want to speak to Samantha Vinograd, who I'm told is joining us as well right now, a national security contributor to CBS. She also joins us on the phone. She was a former assistant secretary for counterterrorism at Homeland Security. And Sam, I know you served before that on the National Security Council as well. There has been so much reporting around the threat in the United States over the past few years, the risk to officials involved with actions against Iran, the risk of sleeper cells here in the United States. When we talk about retaliation, should we be thinking about the homeland?
Margaret, I am deeply concerned about the potential for retaliatory attacks here in the homeland by Iran. Iran's nuclear program has certainly taken a hit. We will await the battleground assessment to understand how deep that hit was. But we do know that Iran is likely going to rely on its asymmetric advantage in this conflict with the United States and Israel, which is its proxies all around the world. Iran has for decades had both intent and the ability to direct and inspire individuals to attack American, Israeli, and Jewish interests and assets all around the world. During my time at Homeland Security, we tracked myriad Iranian threats here in the homeland, as you mentioned, against former government officials involved in the strike against Qasem Soleimani, against dissidents, against journalists, against the Saudi ambassador during the Obama administration, and against everyday Americans. So right now, while Iran has certainly taken a hit to its nuclear program and military installation, it is likely that they will rely on their asymmetric advantage in this context, which is their proxies, to try to send a signal to the United States and to the rest of the world that they just aren't going to take this hit without any kind of response. Now, how significant their reprisals will be is something the intelligence and law enforcement communities are likely looking into, but I am concerned about the threat here in the homeland.
Yeah, I'm looking at an email now from our Homeland Security correspondent, Nicole Skanga, detailing some of the law enforcement officials throughout the country who say they have not yet been given any kind of briefing in regard to possible downstream effects. But as you point out, that doesn't mean there isn't one. In fact, I was speaking to a U.S. official earlier today who said that this administration has shown a higher risk tolerance when it comes to things like this than past administrations. That was in reference to the security of Americans abroad. As we noted there, Sam, it was just earlier today that the U.S. ambassador to Israel announced the details of how to leave Israel right now with U.S. government chartered flights. Is that a little late in the game? If you have an American family member in the region right now, how worried should you be?
Well, Margaret, on your first point, law enforcement and intelligence professionals were already on heightened alert as it pertains to the Iranian threat, just based upon the strikes against Qasem Soleimani and just various Iranian threat streams that were around even when I was at DHS ending in 2023. So while they should get a briefing on downstream effects, they are already very aware of Iranian capabilities in this context and likely monitoring social media, encrypted platforms, and other sources to see if they can find any leads on specific threat streams following these military strikes. Now, I will tell you that we have had operational plans to evacuate Americans from the region for years, and certainly post-October 7th. Those operational plans were ready to go, and I was very surprised that they were not implemented sooner based upon Israel's strikes against Iran and what we knew to be potential strikes against Americans in the region. As soon as President Trump took the decision to launch these strikes, I would have expected him and his National Security Council to immediately begin to actively evacuate Americans, not just from Israel, but potentially from Lebanon, from Egypt, from Iraq. Iran is obviously more complicated. Just knowing that Iran will be looking for opportunities to harm Americans, whether that's through violence, through kidnapping, through harassment, and otherwise. So it wasn't a question of the operational plans not being ready. It was a question of the State Department deciding to implement those plans, the Department of Defense helping to operate them. And I think that it is unfortunately too little too late based upon the cauldron that is the Middle East right now.
Right. Well, those are some cautionary words at this hour, Sam. We know that Americans were ordered out of U.S. mission Iraq a few days ago, but when it came to some of those other posts, there are still plenty of Americans working, living, and many of them with families as well. We're going to continue to track what's happening there in the region. And I want to go now to the White House, where we find White House correspondent Weijia Jiang. Weijia, I know from the rundown here, we saw the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, a number of key advisors, including the CIA director. And there has been a very public back and forth that the president has had disputing